So welcome. Thanks everyone for tuning in today, and big thank you to our sponsors today, the Silicon Valley at Home, Working Partnerships USA, and the Law Foundation. My name is Michael Trujillo. I'm an attorney with the Law Foundation, and I'm here with Supervisor Dave Cortese and Councilmember Magdalena Carrasco to talk about Santa Clara County's new eviction moratorium. So as we know, the first of the month has come, and we know that many tenants are worried about rent being due during this emergency. So the goal of today is to let tenants know how they're protected under the county's new law and what they need to do in order to access that protection. So with that, I'll turn it over to Supervisor Dave Cortese to talk a little bit more about the county's new ordinance.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to everyone involved, and to the extent that we're able to get this message out via streaming, via technology, and also through the media, of course. That'll be a tremendous public service throughout this whole COVID crisis and emergency. The media and our partners in the community have just done a tremendous job of getting information out to the people who need it the most. And I think today, as you pointed out, is an opportunity to clarify some things and hopefully get some people, put some anxiety to rest and make sure that people aren't confused about what's going on. We passed a moratorium. Moratorium means a temporary stop, a stop order on evictions in Santa Clara County at our last Board of Supervisors meeting. And that protection will go through May 31st. It's possible it could be extended, but for now, the ordinance covers through May 31st. And we know that, as was pointed out, rent has come due for most people around April 1st or the first week of April, which is right where we're at now. And we know that causes a lot of anxiety when people don't have the resources to pay it, when people are seeking unemployment in record numbers right now in the state of California and around the Bay Area. We know that this is a big issue, and it's why we put this in place. It's important for tenants to understand that they do need to be proactive. They do need to do something. They need to notify their landlord, and they need to essentially state the case as to why they can't pay based on COVID impact. That could be some direct impact like medical expenses. It could be relatively indirect impact. It could be because of the impact on children in the household. And I'll leave it to someone else at some point here to explain the details of that. But of course, there have been a lot of changes in government regulations in terms of family leave, in terms of this particular moratorium on evictions that now cover even an incidence where family members are impacted and it causes you, the consumer, you, the tenant, to be unable to pay your rent. But you do need to notify the landlord. And for the landlord needs to know, because we represent business people too and landlords too, that this applies to them. They have a right to be notified, and they have a right to their rent. We want to make sure no tenant is under the false belief that, oh great, I just don't have to pay at all. You have to pay at some point. You still owe the rent, but you can't be evicted while you're struggling or unable to pay at this point in time. I want to thank everyone involved again for helping us get this message out. I want to reiterate, and maybe a council member could talk about it as well, but the business community, small businesses are also protected by this ordinance. We're open for questions. We're open for constituent services at the County of Santa Clara as our community-based partners like the Law Foundation. So people who still need advice or are still confused about how the rules work, are welcome to call the Board of Supervisors 299-5000 at area code 408 or any of us to get information that you need. Thank you again.
Thank you, Supervisor. We really appreciate you weighing in and letting tenants know about the new protections they have. So now we'd like to hear from a tenant who has been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis and who will actually be using the protections of the eviction moratorium to retain some stability during this time. So I'll like to introduce Chris Rios, who's a tenant of Milpitas, California.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out here and actually meet. I think it's actually really important that information like this be disseminated for people to understand. So my name is Chris Rios. To give you a little bit of background on myself, a first-generation college student, second-generation American. I went to Stanford, have a background in human biology and computer science, and I've been a resident here in Milpitas for the last 4 years. I've been a resident of Mill Creek for the last 4 years, and if you don't know Mill Creek, it's a very, very large apartment complex. So I don't want people to get the misinformation or the misunderstanding that this is a small mom and pop shop business. I don't really want to. We understand that landlords are people too. Landlords have businesses too, but this is not a small business, and this is not a Californian business. Mill Creek is owned by Equity Residential Management LLC, which is based in Chicago. They have something like 500 units here in Milpitas alone. And I'm here to tell you that we're struggling. Residents are struggling. I'm definitely nowhere near the poverty line. So to tell you that we're struggling right now should be a sign. It should be a signal to council members for you to understand that your constituents are ultimately suffering. People are really suffering. This is a crisis. And I'm here to tell you that this is not the middle of it. This is really just the beginning. We're not even at the halfway point. People really need to understand that as information becomes more widely available, we don't really know how long a quarantine could go into effect for. We don't know how long we could be all out of work for. And what council needs to understand, what managers need to understand, is that we have bills to pay. We have to feed ourselves. There's a lot of food insecurity out here in Santa Clara County. People are having to choose whether or not they can afford to stay on their medications. People are choosing between paying the electric bill or paying the water bill. People are struggling in a big way because hours have been cut dramatically, and there is no information regarding this moratorium. I've been fielding calls on a regular basis from people, predominantly from Spanish-speaking communities, that are telling me that their landlords are demanding rent, that they've been told that rent is due per the terms of your agreement. And so that comes into direct conflict with what other people are saying as far as there being a moratorium on rent. We understand that there's an obligation to pay rent, but what people don't know is that they have 120 days of relief to get everything together, to kind of manage everything. And there needs to be more assistance. Right now, Mill Creek is benefiting from that assistance. They have a moratorium on their mortgage as well. Do they not? So if they own the property right now, if they don't have to pay during this period, just in the same way that residents, but the only difference is that residents have to opt in. And we still ultimately owe that rent at the end of the 120-day period. What's going to happen if people don't pay that rent? They're going to go to civil lawsuit. That's going to flood the courts at a time when there's an international crisis, a pandemic. I think that people need to understand that residents are suffering and people need to step up. Something needs to be done.
Thanks so much, Chris, for sharing your experience and some of the concerns you're hearing from neighbors there in Milpitas. So with that, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Magdalena Carrasco to talk a little bit more about the county's eviction moratorium ordinance and, what tenants have to do to be protected. Thank you, Councilmember Carrasco.
Thank you, Michael, for bringing us together. I really appreciate Supervisor Cortese and, of course, Chris being able to be part of the panel discussion this morning. As we know, yesterday rent was due, And so a lot of folks are feeling the stress and the squeeze, if you will, from a situation that is completely out of our control. We're experiencing something that many of us have never experienced in our lifetime. This is a crisis situation, and families are under a great deal of stress, a great deal of duress. And the phone calls that we're getting from folks are the main concerns, of course, are being able to pay their rent. So the emergency ordinance that was put into place couldn't come at a better time. What folks don't understand, and maybe because we need to do a better job of doing outreach, and this is why this conversation is so important, is making sure that we get the information out. And I just want to make it a point that we're going to be speaking about this in Spanish as well, and being able to produce this in multi-languages. So I want to make sure that our audience understands this. Those who are clicking onto my Facebook, lo vamos a interpretar en español dentro de 20 minutos para los que están escuchando. Por favor, no se me vayan a desaparecer. So what's important to know is that if you're able to pay rent, the moratorium is not a forgiveness of rent. And so we know that these may not be perfect policies, but these are policies that right now at least offer temporary relief for those families who are really in a very difficult situation. They've lost their job, or they've lost hours of work, and they're unable to draw down the kind of income that they had previous to the pandemic that we're experiencing. So the ordinance allows us to have a moratorium on evictions, not a moratorium on rent. If you have the rent, please pay the rent. If you have some of the rent, it's advisable to pay some of it, because you will have 120 days to pay whatever back rent is owed. And I think we all recognize, I think Supervisor recognizes it, we recognize it, that this is still going to be a difficult situation, but every jurisdiction is trying to figure out ways on how we're going to support families. So the most important thing today is shelter in place, stay safe, stay healthy, make sure you follow the county guidelines. This allows you not to go out and continue working under risky situations, not to go look for a job under risky conditions, but rather have some relief and know that you are not to be penalized for turning in your rent late. You're not to be assessed interest because you didn't pay your complete rent, or you paid only partial rent, or you didn't pay anything at all, but rather you have a moratorium, and this is good for the next 120 days. Now, one of the things that we've been hearing that is very, very troubling, and I think Chris Rios, who just spoke, alluded to that, made mention to it, that some folks, because they don't know what their rights are currently with the new ordinance, and this happens when it's new, people don't get all the information, and so we don't always have the tools at our grasp. But landlords are actually asking some folks to sign paperwork committing themselves to either interest, to raising their rent, or to penalties. This ordinance does not permit that to happen. So you can feel free to go ahead and hold off on your rent if you don't have it, and not have the fear of additional fees being impacted on your very limited income. So I want to make sure that is clear, and I know that Michael, you'll be talking about that more, or folks can go ahead and contact the Law Foundation if they feel that their rights are being violated. I also do want to make mention that this also applies to small businesses. Small businesses are being hit very hard. Most of them, unless you're producing food of some sort, but most businesses are closing down shop. And so if you're closing down your doors, it means you don't have a steady revenue. You don't have an income source as well. And so our small business owners, our micro business owners, are really feeling the pinch. And so this ordinance, thank goodness, also applies to them. So there is no eviction of our small businesses. We can feel comfortable that when this is over and done with, that our small businesses will will be able to reopen their doors and will be able to continue producing the kind of products and services that we've come accustomed to and that we rely on. So, so I want to thank our County Board of Supervisor, Supervisor Cortese, and the entire board for really thinking about what needed to be done to make sure that our residents, especially in the unincorporated areas, were protected.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thanks again to both you and Supervisor Cortese for help spreading the word about this important new law, and of course for both of your leadership and pushing for these protections for renters during this emergency. They're critically important, and we really appreciate you helping to get the word out to tenants. We do want to also let tenants know that if they have questions about their rights during this time or experiencing a housing issue, they're still welcome to call our intake line. Our lines are still open. So that number is 408-280-2424. We also recommend that folks call the City of San Jose's Rent Stabilization Program with questions about eviction moratoriums, and that number is 408-975-4480. So our guest and myself will now be available to take some questions from anybody who's on the Zoom call. If you could raise your hand virtually by clicking at the bottom of the screen, then I'll go ahead and unmute you to ask a question. Let's see. I'm not seeing any questions on Zoom, but if you do have questions, if you're on Facebook Live, feel free to write those in the comments, and we'll be checking those and responding to folks later on in the day. So thanks again for joining, everyone, and thanks again to Councilmember Carrasco and Supervisor Cortese for spreading the word about this important new law. Thanks.
Hey, Michael, can you hear me? It's Gabby.